all those white blemishes are salt, and I should point out real quick that it is a confirmed fact that much of the Sahara has surface level salt. And you see those white blemishes on that mountain? That is not clouds, that is not snow. Those are salt deposits.
And surface level salt that would have been from the ocean?
That is what I suggest, because in the middle of that caldera, you have huge patches of salt. And is it reasonable to suggest that that salt existed before the creation of that volcano? Because it seems to me that all that that salt would burn up. And,
right.
and not only that, there is scientific studies that show that there are gastropods, which are sea life, that existed inside that caldera that used to be 1,000 feet deep and dried up just a few thousand years ago. So the fact that this is an 11,000-foot volcano that has salt on top of it, I would say is corresponding evidence that the ocean had once went through it. And if you go over a couple more images, Jamie, you will see far better images that show you that. Okay, so notice how it cuts off. You see to the black right here? That is a lava flow that's dated around 12,000 or so years ago. And regardless of whether the volcano or that water erosion happened 12,000 years ago or 2 million years ago, that in itself is evidence that the ocean blasted through the Sahara Desert literally 50 to 60 million years more recently than previously known. And the implications of this, as far as climate science, as far as the topic of geology and cataclysms, cannot be overstated. I mean, does it not look like that lava flow was cut off by whatever type of erosion that is? Does it? I mean, that's...
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's such a clean line. And it aligns with all the water erosion marks that are to the left of it. Can you make that smaller, Jamie? Can you make it, stretch it out? Yeah.
And... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Nothing. It's just like you could really clearly see that it looks like a line, like a water line passed through what was marked by the volcanic eruption.
And this is one thing I say, I'm like, it's visible to anyone that has eyes to see, but it turns out that the Sahara Desert is one of the least studied places on Earth, mostly because it's so inhospitable. It's an average of 125 degrees Fahrenheit much of the year. It is so unbelievably big that just to get out there, I mean, you need reliable aircraft or vehicles. Most of the countries out there are, I regret to say, third world in that you just don't have supplies. It's not feasible to just travel out there with a whole team on a whim. So most of it is essentially undocumented, and it's not a site. The Sahara as a whole isn't a site that gets much attention, unfortunately.
Ben, we got to bring you in, otherwise it's going to talk forever.
Yeah. No, I was going to say something that you mentioned about the origin of, I guess, Plato's description. You said it was mud and grasses was like the aftermath. It's interesting. It's the topic I've been exploring recently. Is that does match some of the translations of origin stories from the ancient Egyptians. So it's like that the Temple of Horus at Edfu, it's this amazing structure, but it's literally covered head to toe in hieroglyphs and descriptions and all these types of things. But one of the stories in the translations they do talk about is this, what they would call the original point, or the primordial mound, the primordial island. They describe it as being an island that was surrounded by water that was sinking, and essentially these reeds that were growing on it that created a falcon's perch, and then the god, it was either Horus or Horun, one of the falcon gods, alights on this perch and then gains divinity. But as part of that story, I mean, they and then he goes and forms Kemet, essentially the motherland Egypt, and it's this tale of them, I guess, their civilization moving and migrating to this new land. But they do talk about a whole stack of unknown gods and a whole culture that existed before that. It's an interesting correlation. It's something that Graham Hancock speculated about in his work with the Temple of Horus at Edfu. You know, they also have, you know, catastrophic flood myths and things like this. But it may be that whatever prior civilization, and that's might have been where the dynastic Egyptians actually got their origins from, because it seems clear that they've inherited some things from the past. That's a story they themselves tell.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that the story of Atlantis had come from Egypt.
That's one of the most bizarre parts about it. I didn't know this until just a few years ago either. It's like, oh, wait a second. Plato, his distant relative Solon had traveled there in search of knowledge because Egypt was the place to go for it. And
it was the priests of the Delta that told Solon. And they said that, so 6,000 years, or 9,000 years, prior to the time of Solon was when the sinking of this city happened. And that works out to be 9,600 BC, so 11,600 years ago, which is bang on exactly where now the geological evidence points to basically the end of the Younger Dryas cataclysms. Like something we know something happened at the start at like 12,800, 900 years, and then 11,600 years ago was that end of the Younger Dryas that brought us up out of the cold spell and into the Holocene.
Isn't it crazy that that's a full 1,000 years, and we think about it in like the same time period? Like, yeah, I mean, around that time.
I know. Just playing around with it.
We're literally 11,600 to 12,800. We're literally talking about 1,000 fucking years.
It is.
It's so much time.
It's so much time that actually, if you go from 12,008, so basically, let's say 1,200 years. The English language, Old English, is only like 1,400 years, and Modern English is only like 400 or 500 years. So this is such a wide, a long period of time that we weren't even speaking the same language that in that same 1,000 years ago. When you think of it like that, it's
nuts.
a different world.
It's nuts. And if you think about the people that lived 1,000 years ago and how they lived, all of this that I've learned from Graham Hancock and from Randall Carlson and from you guys, all of it is so astonishing, and it all fits into place. It all makes sense. Like, why are we so fucked up? Like, why is civilization so wacky? Why do we have these weird structures that no one can really explain? And when you think about the fact that there's so much evidence that we were hit by comets, that we were hit by large objects. Like, I didn't know about that enormous crater that's in Antarctica.
Oh, yes. I don't know all the details on how old that one's supposed to be, but it's one of the largest, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a big one in Antarctica. I don't know that much about it, but another one that have you heard of Burkle Crater? That's another one?
Yes.
Yeah, Burkle Crater, like the 20-mile hole in the bottom of the Indian Ocean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. And when is that supposed to be from?
So that was 5,000 years ago. They've dated that. It's something plopped down in the Indian Ocean, and it washed up these mega tsunamis on the coast of Madagascar and Western Australia that we can see in satellite images today. These got these like 500-600 foot high chevrons from where the water went miles inland, and they found organic material from the seabed in these chevrons, and then they date that with carbon-14 dating, and they put it right at 5,000 years ago, so 2,500 around that time BC, which is actually a really interesting date when you consider some of the, I guess, the publications that we rely on in our modern civilization today. The Bible, the Old Testament, wasn't written long after that. And if you think about where the Indian Ocean is, that could have been the source of the biblical flood. Like that would have washed up north into the Persian Gulf, flooded the hell out of that whole region.
It's just crazy that it's happened so many times.
That's what they say.
We like to think of history as being this linear thing. We started out as cave people,
That's
and then
right.
we branched out from Africa all across the world,
And that's the end of it.
And kept learning. And here we are today with cell phones. But no, it's we've been rocked like multiple
Many
times, many times,